Can you also talk about your recommended protein allowance?
Mhm.
Again, what I loved about your content, EC, is so I've seen, let's say, two different kinds of recommendations. In my 20s, I used to also lift a lot of weights. I used to be a bit bigger. And I followed the advice that I got, let's say, from the weightlifting community about consuming 1 gram of protein per pound of
By the way, yeah.
body weight. I did used to eat a lot of meat back then. I also, got all of those protein shakes, and I could just about manage that on some days. But I think that is one thing I hear about. And on the other end, there is also this USDA recommendation on the minimum amount of protein. But your recommended amount, I think, is different. And I think it perhaps falls in the middle of that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So, would love for you to talk about your recommendation on protein consumption.
Yeah. Yeah, I typically put out the level of zero point 0.7 grams per pound. So you are correct. It's sort of in the middle of the RDA number and from where a lot of people out of gym culture come from. And, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is the place which is good for athletes who want to put on muscle mass, who are resistance training, doing power sports, all of that stuff. And so I come out of the CrossFit community, so that's my slant. There's not a lot of evidence that people need 1 gram per pound. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think nobody should have 1 gram per pound. The more muscular you are, and when I think muscular, I think very clearly muscular developed above and beyond kind of just anybody walking down the street, like advanced level strength. The more muscular you are, the more likely you're going to be at 1 gram per pound. And the more lean you are, the more likely you're going to be at 1 gram per pound. And it trends together because the people who are really muscular and really lean need a lot of calories. Yes, they need a lot of protein, but they also need a lot of calories. So by the time they get to 3,500 plus calories a day, they are going to be at 1 gram per pound by way of the food that exists. But I work with a lot of people who probably are fitter than the average American because they're in the CrossFit community or a related functional fitness community. So they're active, they're regularly active, but they're not professional athletes. They're not making money by their athleticism. And oftentimes they either want to lean out or they want to maintain their weight. And zero point 0.7 grams per pound is going to be plenty for them. And I think what people don't understand about the 1 gram per pound is I ultimately think that when you overshoot your protein unnecessarily, it's become another version of a restrictive diet. You are giving up those calories to make sure you get in this protein shake, the chicken, the whatever it is, when it could be spent on a glass of wine or dark chocolate. And some people will say, well, you're saying that they should eat not quality food. And I'm saying, no, I'm saying they need to have flexibility in their diet to actually enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if one does not have some flexibility in one's diet, one is that much more likely to abandon it,
Exactly.
right? Like you can start on this hyper strict diet and you might do it for a little while, but then if that totally drains your life of, I don't know, some kind of richness, you will get back and then you will probably get back on the other end of the spectrum, right? And you start eating all kinds of crap food. One nuance I would love for you to help us draw is, again, let's say the weightlifting and crossfitting community. I don't want to combine them, but let's say for the sake
Sure.
of this discussion, they are focused on maybe building muscle, right?
hmm
A lot of the people on this podcast audience are people who are looking for performance with their sports. So they're not, like, for example, I am somewhat conscious of my weight to strength ratio.
hmm
Like I don't,
hmm
I used to be like 20 pounds heavier and I was, lifting a lot and all of that stuff. But now I don't want to get heavier. So what is the recommendation for somebody like me? I want strength. I want
hmm
longevity. I want to be able to keep, pushing myself outside all the time, but I don't want to get bigger.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. And I think something that people forget with muscle mass is you don't just get more muscle mass from eating protein. You actually have to do the resistance training that would put the stress on the body to add that more muscle mass. So if you do a lot of running and you eat a lot of protein, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're all of a sudden just going to have biceps popping everywhere. You're going to need to do the activities that demand your biceps to grow in a way to be able to lift and do the reps that you're demanding of it. Same thing with leg muscles. And so this is where, there is research on endurance athletes. There is some endurance athletes who are successful at a lower amount of protein, let's say a 0.55 grams per pound. But typically the range for endurance is kind of the 1.2 to the 1.6 grams per kilogram, which translates to the 0.55 to the 0.7 grams per pound. So I'm okay with the 0.7 grams per pound, even for athletes like you. What we probably would not be doing is CrossFit training and or like really pushing the hypertrophy back squat routine with you. You'd still want a back squat, but we wouldn't necessarily be like, oh gosh, you have to make sure that we really maximize our 5x3 today. And then tomorrow you have to do weighted pull-ups and weighted dips,
Right. You're right. Diet is just one end of the spectrum. If one is not putting in that specific kind of weight training, one is not going to really change that. One is not going to, just suddenly gain a
grow
lot of
massive. And that's something that people, I think, maybe it's because I deal with nutrition, so I get the nutrition questions a lot. But it's like people think they're just going to put on all this muscle mass by eating enough protein. You're like, no, you have to train really hard to put on that much muscle mass.